The Iron Phoenix dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kethvar system like a metal shark emerging from deep water. Captain Lee Minho sat in his command chair looking at the sensor readings with calm eyes. His ship was smaller than most alien vessels, but it was built like a fortress. Everything on it was designed to work, even when everything else was falling apart. Dozens of alien ships appeared on their screens. The entire sector had been surrounded by the Galactic Federation fleet. Massive battle cruisers from the crystalline hegemony floated next to sleek patrol vessels from the Vielthian collective. Every major species in the galaxy had sent their best ships to watch what would happen when humans tried to land on Kethvar, Lieutenant. Park Hana checked her weapon systems one more time. Her fingers moved over the controls with practiced speed. She had been fighting since she was 18 years old, and she knew that preparation was the difference between success and death. Alien ships around them had weapons that could destroy planets, but they were all staying far away from Kethvar. That told her everything she needed to know about how dangerous this mission really was. Engineer Kim Do-yun was in the engine room making. Sure, their systems could handle the electromagnetic storms that surrounded the Death Planet. His tools were simple compared to alien technology, but they were reliable. Human engineering was not about making things perfect. It was about making things that worked when perfect was not possible. Medic Song Yura organized her medical supplies in the small sickbay. She had trauma kits for treating every type of injury she could think of. She also had emergency stimulants that could keep someone alive, even when their body was shutting down from poison or shock. The alien researchers they were going to rescue might be in very bad condition by now. Communications specialist Choi Tai-hyung tried to establish contact with the Federation fleet, but all he got was silence. Every alien commander was watching them, but none of them wanted to talk. It was like they were afraid that even speaking to humans might bring bad luck. Captain Minho opened a communication channel to the Federation fleet. His voice was steady and professional as he announced their intention to proceed to Kethvar. He could hear the fear in the alien voices that finally responded. They warned him about the electromagnetic interference, the poisonous atmosphere, and the unknown threat that had awakened deep underground. Admiral Zexthara of the Crystalline Hegemony personally contacted the Iron Phoenix. Her crystalline body was glowing with nervous energy as she spoke. Captain Minho, you must understand this planet has killed every expedition that has tried to land there. The very air will burn your lungs. The ground will collapse under your feet. Whatever is hiding beneath the surface has already driven the research team to madness. Minho listened politely to all her warnings. Then he gave a response that made every alien in the fleet go silent. Thank you for the information, Admiral. We have been preparing for this mission our entire lives. Earth was excellent training for dealing with hostile environments. We will proceed as planned. The alien commanders looked at each other with confusion and terror. They could not understand how 5 beings could be so calm about flying into certain death. They did not know that humans had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Storms that could flatten cities, earthquakes that could split continents, animals that hunted humans for food, diseases that spread faster than wildfire. Every human child grew up knowing that the world was dangerous. That safety was temporary. That death was always one mistake away. But they also learned that fear was just information. It told you what to be careful about, but it did not stop you from doing what needed to be done. The Iron Phoenix began its descent toward Kethvar. The electromagnetic field around the planet was so strong that it made the ship shake like a leaf in a hurricane. The alien ships had to use their most advanced computers just to maintain position outside the interference zone. But the human ship pushed through it like it was nothing more than rough weather. Admiral Zexthara watched in amazement as the primitive human vessel disappeared into the poisonous atmosphere surrounding Kethvar. Her own ships would have been torn apart by the electromagnetic storms, but the humans seemed completely unaffected. She began to understand why these creatures had such a terrifying reputation across the galaxy, Lieutenant Park. Hana monitored their descent through the turbulent atmosphere. The ship was shaking so hard that she had to hold on to her chair, but she was not worried. Human spacecraft were built to handle re-entry through planetary atmospheres that could melt most metals. The toxic gases and electrical storms around Kethvar were dangerous, but they were not impossible. Engineer Kim Do-hyun watched his engine readings carefully. The electromagnetic interference was playing havoc with their more sensitive equipment, but the basic systems were still working perfectly. Human technology was designed with redundancy and simplicity in mind. When the fancy systems failed, the simple ones kept working. The Iron Phoenix broke through the lower atmosphere, and Kethvar spread out below them like a nightmare made real. The entire planet's surface was covered with crystalline formations that glowed with an eerie blue light. The crystals grew in impossible shapes that hurt to look at. They seemed to exist in more dimensions than the eye could process. Captain Minho studied the landscape through the view screen, looking for a safe landing site. The research station was built into the side of a mountain 15 kilometers from their current position. The ground between was covered with crystal spires that could slice through their ship hull like paper. But Minho had landed spacecraft in worse places during the colony wars. The ship touched down in a small clearing between two crystal formations. The landing was so gentle that the crew barely felt it. Captain Minho had been flying since he was 16 years old, and he could land a ship anywhere that had enough space for the landing gear. As soon as they were on the ground, Choi Tae-hyung tried to establish contact with the research station. The electromagnetic interference was so strong that normal communication was impossible. But he had brought equipment designed for battlefield conditions where enemy jamming was constant. After several minutes, he managed to get a weak signal. The voice that came through the speakers was barely recognizable as intelligent speech. It was distorted by fear and exhaustion, and something else that sounded like madness. 12 survivors were still alive in the emergency bunker beneath the research station, but they were in very bad condition. They had been trapped for 3 days with limited food and water, but worse than that, they had been listening to something moving in the tunnels beneath them. Something huge and ancient that had been sleeping until the research team accidentally woke it up. The survivors called it a void leviathan, and they said it fed on fear and despair. The more terrified people became, the stronger it grew. Captain Minho listened to their report and nodded calmly. He had dealt with unknown threats before, during the exploration missions beyond human space. The key was to gather information, prepare for multiple possibilities, and then adapt when the situation changed. You could not plan for everything, but you could be ready for anything. The crew of the Iron Phoenix began suiting up for the trek across the hostile landscape. Their environmental gear looked primitive compared to alien technology, but it was built to work in conditions that would destroy more sophisticated equipment. They had breathing apparatus that could filter out almost any toxin, suits that could withstand temperatures from freezing to boiling, communication systems that worked even under heavy interference. As they prepared to leave their ship and venture onto the surface of Kethvar, the 5 humans looked calm and professional. They had done this kind of mission before in different places under different conditions, but the principle was always the same. People were in trouble and needed help. Everything else was just details to be worked out along the way. The Federation fleet watched from orbit as the human team left their ship and began walking across the crystal field toward the research station. Every alien commander was holding their breath, wondering if they were about to witness the first failure of the legendary human Deathworlders or something far more incredible. Lieutenant Park Hana took the lead as the 5 humans left their ship and stepped onto the surface of Kethvar. The crystal formations around them rose like frozen lightning reaching toward the poisonous sky. Each crystal was sharp enough to cut, through metal, and they hummed with a low frequency that made the ground vibrate under their feet. The air was thick with toxic gases that glowed faintly in the dim light from the planets. 3 suns most alien species would have died within minutes of breathing this atmosphere, but humans had evolved lungs that could process almost anything. Their enhanced liver and kidney systems filtered out poisons that would kill other beings in seconds. Captain Minho checked his navigation equipment and pointed toward the mountain where the research station was built. The distance was 15 kilometers across terrain that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated all living things. Sharp crystal spires blocked direct paths, deep crevasses opened without warning. The ground shifted and cracked as underground pressures built and released. Engineer Kim Do-yeon marveled at the geological formations as they walked. He had studied hostile environments across human space, but Kethvar was something special. The crystals were not just dangerous. They were actively malevolent. They resonated at frequencies designed to disrupt nervous systems and cause hallucinations. Most beings would go insane just from walking among them, but humans had lived. With industrial noise pollution for centuries, their brains had adapted to filter out harmful frequencies while still processing important information. The crystal song that would drive aliens mad sounded like nothing more than annoying background noise to human ears. Medic Song Yura monitored her team's vital signs through their suit communication system. Everyone was functioning normally despite the hostile environment. Human physiology was incredibly adaptable. They could survive in conditions that would kill most galactic species because Earth had been trying to kill them for millions of years. The trek across the crystal field was like walking through a maze designed by a madman. Every step had to be carefully planned because the sharp formations could slice through their environmental suits if they made a wrong move. But humans were persistence hunters. They had evolved to travel long distances across dangerous terrain while staying alert for threats. Communications specialist Choi Tae-hyung maintained contact with both their ship and the survivors in the research station. The electromagnetic interference was so strong that he had to constantly adjust his equipment, but he managed to keep the signals clear enough for basic communication. The survivors were getting more frightened as something large moved in the tunnels beneath them. As they got closer to the research station, the crystal formations became even more bizarre. They twisted and curved in ways that hurt to look at, as if they existed in dimensions that human eyes were not designed to see. But the team pressed forward with steady determination. They had seen worse things during the exploration of the outer colonies. The poisonous atmosphere was getting thicker as they climbed toward the mountain. The toxic gases would have been lethal to most species, but humans had been breathing polluted air since they first discovered fire. Their respiratory systems had evolved multiple backup mechanisms for processing contaminated atmospheres. Captain Minho called a brief halt when they reached the halfway point. The team gathered in the shadow of a massive crystal formation that provided some protection from the worst of the electromagnetic interference. He wanted to check their progress and make sure everyone was still in good condition. Engineer Kim Do-hyun was excited rather than frightened by the hostile environment. He had grown up on a mining colony where cave-ins and gas explosions were daily hazards. This planet was dangerous, but it followed physical laws that could be understood and worked around. The crystals might be trying to kill them, but they were predictable in their malevolence. Lieutenant Park Hana scanned the area around them. With her weapon sensors, she could detect movement in the crystal formations, but it was hard to tell if it was caused by the planet's natural instability or something more dangerous. Her training had taught her to assume every shadow hid an enemy. Until proven otherwise, the research station was visible now built into the side of the mountain like a metal growth. The building looked damaged, with several sections collapsed and others hanging at dangerous angles. Whatever had attacked the research team had been powerful enough to tear through reinforced construction materials. Medic Song Yura checked her medical supplies one more time. She had everything she needed to treat trauma, injuries, poison exposure, and psychological shock. The survivors had been trapped for 3 days with limited resources and constant terror. They would need immediate medical attention once the rescue was complete. As they resumed their march toward the station, the ground beneath their feet began to shake more violently. Something was moving in the deep tunnels far below them, something massive that had been disturbed by the research team's excavation. The vibrations were strong enough to crack some of the smaller crystal formations. Communications specialist Choi Tai-hyung managed to establish clearer contact with the survivors. Their voices were strained with fear and exhaustion, but they were still alive. The emergency bunker had protected them from direct attack, but they could hear the creature moving. Closer every hour, its presence seemed to drain hope from the air around it. The thing they called the Void Leviathan was unlike anything in the galactic databases. It was not a natural creature, but something from the spaces between dimensions that had been trapped on this planet millions of years ago. The research team had accidentally broken the crystal matrix that held it prisoner. According to the survivors, the creature fed on negative emotions. Fear, despair, hopelessness, and terror made it stronger while positive emotions weakened it. Most intelligent species became paralyzed with existential dread when they encountered something so far beyond their understanding. But humans were different. Humans had been dealing with incomprehensible, cosmic horror in their entertainment media for decades. They had developed psychological frameworks for processing encounters with things that should not exist. They had learned to find hope in hopeless situations and to keep fighting even when defeat seemed certain. Captain Minho listened to the survivors' descriptions of the Void Leviathan with professional interest. A creature that fed on fear and grew stronger from despair sounded like a challenging opponent, but not an impossible one. The key would be to approach it with the right mindset and the right tactics. The team reached the research station as Kethvar 3 Sons were setting behind the crystal formations. The building was more damaged than they had expected, with entire sections twisted into impossible shapes by forces that defied physics. But the emergency bunker was still intact deep in the mountain. Hart Lieutenant Park Hana established a perimeter while engineer Kim Do-hyun examined the station's power systems. Most of the equipment was dead, but the emergency generators were still running on backup power. The bunker could be reached through a service tunnel that had been partially collapsed by the creature's attacks as they prepared to enter the research station. The ground shook again with tremendous force. Somewhere far below them, the Void Leviathan was stirring. It had sensed their presence and was beginning to rise toward the surface. The real battle was about to begin. The 5 humans checked their equipment one final time and prepared to descend into the tunnels beneath the research station. They were about to face something that had terrified civilizations across the galaxy for millions of years, but they approached it with the calm professionalism of people who had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Earth had been an excellent teacher when it came to dealing with things that wanted to kill you. The research station was a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered crystal formations. Captain Minho led his team through the wreckage with careful steps, avoiding the sharp debris that covered the floor like deadly confetti. The alien research equipment had been sophisticated and expensive, but now it looked like it had been put through a blender made of nightmares. The main laboratory was at the center of the complex, and that was where they found the artifact that had started all the trouble. It was a massive crystalline structure about 3 meters tall that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. Looking directly at it made human eyes water and caused a strange dizziness, but the team had seen worse during their exploration missions. Engineer Kim Do-hyun studied the artifact with professional curiosity while keeping a safe distance. The crystal was beautiful in an alien way, but there was something fundamentally wrong about it. It pulsed with a light that came from somewhere else and cast shadows that moved independently of any light source. According to the research logs, the alien scientists had found the artifact buried deep in the planet's core. They had been studying it for weeks, trying to understand its purpose and origin. 3 days ago, it had started singing a low harmonic sound that seemed to come from inside people's heads, and that was when everything went wrong. Lieutenant Park Hana examined the damage to the research station walls. Something with incredible strength had torn through reinforced metal like it was made of paper. The attack patterns suggested tentacles or appendages that could strike from multiple directions at once. Whatever had done this was both intelligent and extremely dangerous. Communications. Specialist Choi Tae-hyung established contact with the survivors who were hiding in the emergency bunker deep below the station. Their voices crackled through the static filled with terror and exhaustion. They had been trapped for 3 days, listening to something massive moving in the tunnels beneath them. The survivors were members of the peaceful Vaelthian Collective, a species known for their advanced scientific knowledge and gentle nature. They had come to Kethvar to study the planet's unique crystal formations, but had accidentally discovered something that should have stayed buried forever. Dr. Kelthani. The expedition leader spoke in broken sentences, interrupted by fits of sobbing. The thing that came out of the crystal, she said, the Void Leviathan. It is not from our dimension. It feeds on fear and despair. The more frightened we become, the stronger it grows. We can feel it, draining our hope away. Medic Song Yura listened to the survivors' medical reports with growing concern. 3 of the 12 aliens were showing signs of severe psychological trauma induced by prolonged exposure to the creature's psychic influence. Their minds were beginning to shut down from pure existential terror. The other survivors described tentacles, made of living darkness that could reach through solid matter, eyes that burned with the cold fire of dead stars, and a presence that made reality itself feel unstable. The creature existed partially outside normal space, which allowed it to appear. Anywhere without warning, Captain Minho processed this information with the calm efficiency of someone who had been dealing with impossible situations his entire career. A creature that fed on fear and could manipulate reality sounded challenging, but every enemy had weaknesses. The key was to find those weaknesses and exploit them. The Void Leviathan had been trapped in the crystal matrix for millions of years, which meant it could be contained. The research team's excavation had damaged the containment field, but had not completely destroyed it. That suggested the creature was not as powerful as it wanted its victims to believe. As the team prepared to descend into the tunnels toward the emergency bunker, the artifact in the laboratory began to pulse more rapidly. The crystal structure was responding to their presence, and somewhere far below them, the Void Leviathan was awakening more fully. Engineer Kim Do-hyun attached monitoring equipment to the artifact to study its energy patterns. The readings were unlike anything in human scientific databases. The crystal was broadcasting some kind of signal across multiple dimensions, calling to something that existed in the spaces between realities. The tunnels beneath the research station had been carved by the alien scientists to reach the artifact's original location deep in the planet's core. The walls were smooth and precisely cut, but now they were covered with a substance that looked like living shadow. It moved and writhed when exposed to light. Lieutenant Park Hana took point as they descended into the tunnel system. Her weapon sensors were going crazy, trying to track targets that appeared and disappeared without following normal physical laws. The creature's psychic influence was growing stronger as they got closer to its location. The emergency bunker was located 3 levels below the main laboratory, connected by a series of maintenance tunnels that were barely wide enough for a single person. The survivors had sealed themselves inside when the creature first emerged, but their barrier would not hold much longer. Communications. Specialist Choi Tae-hyung maintained contact with the survivors as they navigated the twisted tunnel system. The aliens' voices were becoming More distorted as the creature's influence affected their communication equipment, reality was becoming unstable in the area around the void Leviathan. As they reached the second level, the tunnel walls began to pulse with the same rhythm as the artifact. Above them, the living shadow substance was thicker here, covering everything like a layer of malevolent oil. It whispered in languages that had never existed, promising despair and inevitable doom. Medic song. Yura monitored her team's psychological state through their suit sensors. Humans were more resistant to psychic attacks than most species because they had evolved minds capable of processing extreme trauma and continuing to function. But even they were beginning to feel the creature's influence. The Void. Leviathan was not just a predator, it was a force of entropy and destruction that sought to reduce all organized matter to chaos and despair. It had destroyed countless civilizations across the galaxy by driving entire populations to madness and self-destruction. But the creature had never encountered humans before. It did not understand that these particular beings had evolved on a world that had been trying to destroy them for millions of years. They had developed psychological defenses against cosmic horror that other species could not imagine. The tunnel shook violently as something massive moved far below them. The void Leviathan was beginning to rise toward the surface, drawn by the presence of new prey. It could sense their fear and was preparing to feed. But it was about to discover that human fear was different from the terror of other species. Humans had learned to use fear as information rather than letting it paralyze them. They had developed the ability to function effectively while terrified, to make rational decisions while facing incomprehensible threats. They had turned their world's hostility into strength. The emergency bunker was just ahead, sealed behind a heavy metal door that had been reinforced. With crystal formations, the survivors inside were barely alive, drained of hope and strength by 3 days of constant psychological assault. But they were about to be rescued by beings who specialized in doing the impossible. Captain Minho checked his team's equipment one final time as they prepared to breach the bunker and extract the survivors. The real battle was about to begin because saving the aliens was only the first part of their mission. They still had to deal with the void Leviathan itself. The creature was rising through the tunnel system toward them, drawn by the promise of fresh terror to consume. It had fed on the fear of civilizations for eons and considered itself invincible, but it was about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species. The ancient terror was coming, and 5 humans were preparing to meet it head-on. The alarm bells rang through the giant space station floating in the darkness between stars. Commander Thalvanox jumped up from his sleeping pod and ran to the control room. His green skin was still glowing from the sleep chemicals, but his 4 hearts were beating fast. Something was very wrong. The Silver Wing was the biggest patrol ship in this part of the galaxy. It had over 200 alien crew members from 15 different planets. They were the best soldiers and explorers the Galactic Federation had ever trained. But right now, they all looked scared. The distress call was coming from a place no one wanted to go. Kethvar was a mining planet on the edge of known space. It was covered in sharp crystal rocks that could cut through metal. The air was full of poison gases, and the ground was always shaking from underground explosions. Even the toughest alien soldiers called it a death trap. Thalvanox looked at the message screen. The words were jumping around because of the static, but he could still read them. Research station under attack. Strange energy readings from deep underground. All contact lost with main facility. 12 crew members trapped in emergency bunker. Please send help immediately. The message had been sent 3 days ago. It had taken that long to reach the Silver Wing through all the interference from the crystal formations on Kethvar. By now, the trapped aliens might already be dead, but the Federation rules were clear. No distress call could be ignored. No matter how dangerous the rescue mission might be, Thalvanox called his officers to the main meeting room. They were all experienced soldiers who had fought in the great wars against the machine planets. They had seen terrible battles and survived impossible missions. But when he told them about Kethvar, they all went quiet. Lieutenant Zarath was the first to speak. His blue tentacles were shaking slightly as he looked at the planet data on the big screen. Commander, this planet is rated as completely hostile to all known life forms. The poisonous atmosphere alone would kill most of our crew in minutes. Even with our best environmental suits, we could not survive more than a few hours. Captain Valonia nodded her massive head. Her species came from a heavy-gravity world where they had evolved thick armor and incredible strength. But even she looked worried. The crystal formations on that planet vibrate at frequencies that can shatter our nervous systems. Our ship sensors would be useless in that environment. We would be flying blind. The other officers agreed. The mission was impossible. They would need a species that could survive in environments that killed everyone else. They would need soldiers who were not afraid of poisonous air, or deadly crystals, or unknown underground threats. They would need someone crazy enough to volunteer for a suicide mission. Thalvanox opened the Federation database and searched for species that might be able to help. There were not many options. Most civilized races lived on peaceful worlds with clean air and stable ground. They were smart and advanced, but they were not built for surviving on death planets. Then he found it. Species designation, human planet of origin. Earth, Class 12. Death World. Warning level. Extreme caution advised contact only in emergency situations. Thalvanox had heard stories about humans, but he had never met one. The rumors said they came from a world so dangerous that just living there was considered a miracle by galactic standards. Their planet had weather that could freeze or burn you in hours. It had animals that hunted in organized groups with intelligence. It had diseases that could kill you in days and natural disasters that could destroy entire continents. Database said humans had only discovered space travel 50 years ago, but they were already known across the galaxy as the most dangerous species anyone had ever encountered. They did not have the best technology or the strongest weapons, but they had something no other species possessed. They never gave up fighting. No matter how hopeless things became, some aliens said humans were insane. Others said they were the ultimate survivors. The truth was, probably both. They had evolved in an environment so hostile that they had developed psychological traits that other species found disturbing. They actually seemed to enjoy dangerous situations. They volunteered for missions that guaranteed death. They helped strangers even when it put their own lives at risk. Thalvanox hesitated before sending the message to Earth. He was asking these creatures to fly across the galaxy to rescue aliens they had never met on a planet that would try to kill them from the moment they arrived. It was not fair to ask anyone to do something so dangerous, but the 12 researchers trapped on Kethvar were counting on him. He had sworn an oath to protect all citizens of the Federation regardless of what species they were. He sent the message to Earth and included all the data about Kethvar and the underground threat that had awakened. He made it clear that this was probably a suicide mission and that no one would blame them if they refused. The response came back in less than 6 hours. A single ship with the identification beacon Iron Phoenix was already on its way. The crew manifest showed only 5 names: Lee Min-ho Park, Hana Kim Do-hyun, Song Yura, and Choi Tae-hyung. 5 humans were coming to attempt a rescue mission that the entire Federation fleet was afraid to try. Thalvanox looked at their service records and his 4 hearts started beating even faster. Captain Lee Min-ho had survived 3 different war zones and had been decorated for rescuing civilians under enemy fire. Lieutenant Park Hana was an expert marksman who had single-handedly held off an entire enemy battalion. Engineer Kim Do-hyun could repair any machine under any conditions, even while being shot at. Medic Song Yura had worked in disaster zones across human space. She had saved lives during plague outbreaks, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts. Communications specialist Choi Tae-young had maintained contact with rescue teams in situations where the equipment should have been impossible to operate. These were not just soldiers. They were professionals who had spent their entire careers walking into situations that would terrify most beings in the galaxy. They had volunteered for this mission not because they were crazy, but because someone needed help, and they were the only ones who could provide it. Thalvanok sent a message to all Federation ships in the area, telling them to stay clear of the Kethvar system until the human rescue mission was complete. He did not know what was going to happen. When 5 Deathworlders landed on one of the most hostile planets in known space, but he had a feeling the galaxy was about to learn why humans had earned their terrifying reputation. The Iron Phoenix was coming, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, 5 humans were preparing to do what the rest of the galaxy considered impossible. They were going to fly into hell itself to save 12 strangers, and they were going to do it because that was what humans did. The Void. Leviathan death scream echoed across multiple dimensions as engineer Kim Do-hyun explosive charges finally destabilized the creature's connection to reality. The ancient entity that had terrorized civilizations for millions of years dissolved into harmless energy that dissipated into the quantum foam between dimensions. Captain Minho watched the creature's remains fade away, with the same calm expression he had worn throughout the entire battle. His team had systematically dismantled something that galactic legends claimed was invincible, and they had done it using nothing more than standard military equipment and human stubbornness. Lieutenant Park Hana lowered her plasma rifle and began checking on the alien survivors who were staring at the humans with expressions of complete disbelief. The Velthian researchers had been certain they were going to die in this tunnel system, but instead they had been rescued by 5 beings who seemed utterly unimpressed by cosmic horror medic. Song Yura continued providing medical treatment to the survivors, while communications specialist Choi Tae-hyung established contact with the Federation fleet in orbit. His voice was as professional as ever as he reported mission completion and requested immediate medical evacuation for the rescued researchers. The Iron Phoenix lifted off from Kethvar's surface, carrying all 12 survivors to safety. Captain Minho filed his mission report with the same bureaucratic efficiency he would use for any routine patrol. The document simply stated that the unknown threat had been neutralized and all rescue objectives had been achieved. Admiral Zexthera of the Crystalline Hegemony read the human mission report 3 times before she could believe what she was seeing. The creatures that her species had fled from in terror for thousands of years had been eliminated by 5 humans who described it as a standard rescue operation. The Federation fleet medical ships received the alien survivors and immediately began intensive treatment for psychological trauma. The Vaelthian researchers were physically healthy, but their minds had been severely damaged by exposure to the Void, Leviathan's psychic influence. Dr. Kelthani was the first survivor, able to give a coherent account of what had happened in the tunnel system. Her voice shook as she described how the humans had walked into hell itself and emerged victorious. They faced something that could have destroyed entire star systems, and they never stopped believing they could win. The story spread across the galaxy at faster than light speeds, carried by every ship that had witnessed the battle at Kethvar. Traders told the tale at spaceports. Diplomats discussed it in council chambers. Military officers studied the tactical recordings with growing amazement. Within weeks, every intelligent species in the galaxy had heard about the Deathworlders from Earth, who had casually eliminated a threat that had been the subject of terrified legends for millennia. The humans had become simultaneously the most feared and most respected species in galactic history. Captain Minho received hundreds of communication requests from alien governments wanting to understand how 5 humans had accomplished something that entire fleets had considered impossible. His responses were always the same, polite, professional, and utterly matter-of-fact. He explained that growing up on Earth was excellent preparation for dealing with hostile environments. Humans had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every day through weather disasters, disease, and predators. They had learned to treat fear as information rather than letting it paralyze them. The Void Leviathan had been powerful and dangerous, but it had made the mistake of using fear as its primary weapon against a species that had spent millions of years learning to function while terrified. Humans did not fight because they were not afraid. They fought because being afraid did not stop them from doing what needed to be done. The Galactic Intelligence Services began studying human psychology and culture with intense fascination. They discovered a species that had developed unique mental traits through evolutionary pressure. Unlike other intelligent beings, humans seemed to become more determined when faced with impossible odds. Human entertainment, media was filled with stories about ordinary people facing cosmic horrors and emerging victorious. Their literature celebrated heroes who chose hope over despair, even when the universe itself seemed hostile to their existence. Their philosophy emphasized the importance of fighting for what was right, regardless of the consequences. The Federation Council officially recognized humanity as a Class Alpha rescue species, meaning they would be the first choice for any mission involving hostile environments or unknown threats. The humans accepted this designation with the same casual professionalism they showed toward everything else. Other species began sending their military officers to train with human forces, hoping to learn the psychological techniques that made them so effective in crisis situations. But human instructors found it difficult to teach what came naturally through evolutionary adaptation. The key seemed to be a fundamental difference in how humans processed existential threats, where other species became paralyzed by the vastness and indifference of the universe. Humans found it liberating. They reasoned that if the universe did not care about them, then they were free to care about each other. Captain Minho and his crew returned to routine patrol duties along the Earth frontier, but their reputation preceded them. Wherever they went, alien crews would change course just to get a glimpse of the legendary Deathworlders who had killed something that gods feared. The Iron Phoenix became a symbol throughout the galaxy, representing humanity's unique approach to problem-solving. When faced with an impossible situation, humans did not waste time lamenting the unfairness of it. They simply adapted their tactics and kept fighting until they found a solution. Lieutenant Park Hana was promoted to captain and given command of her own rescue vessel. Engineer Kim Do-hyun became the leading expert on hostile environment engineering. Medic Song Yura established training programs for treating psychological trauma caused by cosmic entities. Communications specialist Choi Tae-hyung wrote a technical manual on maintaining equipment function in reality distortion fields that became required reading for every communications officer in the Federation fleet. His calm professionalism during the Kethvar mission had impressed even the most experienced alien commanders. The Velthian survivors eventually recovered from their psychological trauma and returned to scientific research. They never forgot the 5 humans who had walked into nightmare itself to save them. Dr. Kelthani established a research foundation dedicated to studying human psychology and resilience. Years later, when new cosmic threats, the emergency bunker door exploded inward as Captain Minho used a plasma charge to breach the reinforced barrier. The 12 alien survivors inside screamed in terror, thinking the Void Leviathan had finally broken through their last defense. But instead, they saw 5 humans in environmental suits moving with calm professional efficiency. Medic Song Yura immediately began treating the most severely injured survivors, while Lieutenant Park Hana established a defensive perimeter around the bunker entrance. The aliens were in terrible condition, suffering from dehydration, exhaustion, and severe psychological trauma from 3 days of constant psychic assault. Dr. Kelthani The Vielthian expedition leader was barely conscious her normally. Blue skin turned pale gray from terror. She grabbed Minho's arm with a shaking hand. "You must leave immediately," she whispered. "The creature is coming. It feeds on fear and despair. The more afraid you become, the stronger it grows." Captain Minho knelt beside the terrified alien and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "We understand the threat, Doctor. But fear is just information. It tells us what to be careful about. It does not stop us from doing our job. We are here to get you to safety. And that is exactly what we are going to do." The tunnel system around them began to shake more violently as the void Leviathan sensed the presence of new prey. The creature had been dormant for millions of years, but now it was fully awakening, drawn by the promise of fresh terror to consume. The living shadow substance on the walls grew thicker and more active. Engineer Kim Do-hyun worked quickly to set up portable lighting systems throughout the bunker. The creature's influence seemed to be weaker in bright light. Though it was not completely stopped by illumination, he also prepared explosive charges that could collapse tunnel sections if they needed to slow the creatures. Advanced communications specialist Choi Tae-hyung tried to maintain contact with the Iron Phoenix, but the electromagnetic interference was getting worse as the creature rose through the tunnel system. The void Leviathan's presence was disrupting reality itself, making normal physics behave in impossible ways. The first tentacle emerged from the tunnel floor like a nightmare made solid. It was as thick as a tree trunk and composed of what looked like living darkness. The surface rippled and writhed with patterns that hurt to look at. Directly, most intelligent beings would have been paralyzed with terror, but the humans simply adjusted their tactics. Lieutenant Park Hana opened fire with her plasma rifle, targeting the tentacle center mass, where her structural analysis suggested the most damage could be done. The energy bolts passed through the creature without apparent effect, but she continued firing anyway, using different frequencies and power settings. More tentacles emerged from the walls and ceiling as the void Leviathan pushed itself up through the tunnel system. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a city block with countless appendages that could strike from any direction, the bunker filled with a sound like reality itself, screaming. The psychic assault hit the humans like a tsunami of pure, existential dread. The creature flooded their minds with visions of cosmic insignificance, inevitable doom, and the meaninglessness of all existence. Most beings exposed to this level of psychic attack would have gone insane within seconds. But humans had been dealing with existential dread as a daily part of their lives for their entire evolutionary history. They lived on a world that constantly reminded them of their mortality and the universe's indifference to their survival they had built. Civilizations anyway reached for the stars anyway, chosen hope anyway. Captain Minho coordinated the team's response with the same calm efficiency he might use to organize a camping trip. The creature's tentacles were massive and powerful, but they moved in predictable patterns. Human combat training emphasized adaptability, and using enemy strength against them, Engineer Kim Do-hyun triggered the first set of explosive charges, bringing down a section of tunnel ceiling on several tentacles. The void Leviathan roared with a sound that existed in dimensions human ears were not designed to hear, but the creature was definitely feeling pain from the attack medic's song. Yura continued treating the alien survivors even as reality warped around them. Her steady hands and unshakable focus came from years of providing medical care in war zones and natural disasters. She had learned to maintain concentration even when the world was ending around her. The void Leviathan tried a different approach, flooding the bunker with hallucinations designed to drive its prey to madness. The humans found themselves surrounded by visions of their worst fears, their deepest regrets, and their most painful memories. But they had all been through psychological Training for dealing with enemy mind games, Lieutenant Park Hana saw images of everyone she had ever failed to save during her military service. The faces of dead comrades haunted her vision, but she pushed through the hallucinations and continued, targeting the creature's weak points. She had learned long ago that guilt was a luxury she could not afford during combat. The creature realized that its normal tactics were not working on these strange beings. Their fear was different from what it usually encountered. Instead of being paralyzed by terror, they were using their fear as fuel to fight harder. The Void. Leviathan had never encountered prey that became more dangerous when frightened. Communications specialist Choi Tai-hyung managed to establish brief contact with the Federation fleet in orbit. His transmission was filled with static, but his voice remained calm and professional as he provided status updates. Target is engaged, survivors located and receiving medical attention, requesting immediate evacuation support upon mission completion. The battle that followed became the subject of legend across the galaxy for years afterward. 5 humans armed with nothing more than standard military equipment faced down a cosmic entity that had terrorized civilizations for eons. The Void, Leviathan, threw everything it had at them, reality-warping abilities, psychic attacks, and physical force that could crush battleships. But the humans had something the creature did not understand. They had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to find hope in hopeless situations. They had developed the ability to look at impossible odds and decide to fight anyway. They were too stubborn to be impressed by cosmic horror engineer. Kim Do-yeon used his knowledge of structural engineering to identify critical support points in the tunnel system. His explosives were not powerful enough to kill the creature directly, but they could damage the containment matrix that had originally held it prisoner, the Void. Leviathan began to realize it was in serious trouble. These beings were not reacting to its presence the way prey was supposed to react. Instead of being driven to despair, they were becoming more determined instead of giving up hope. They were fighting with increasing ferocity. Captain Minho made the tactical decision to evacuate the survivors while continuing to engage the creature. The alien researchers were too weak to survive much more psychic assault, but they could be moved to safety while the humans dealt with the Void Leviathan as medic song. Yura helped the last of the survivors toward the tunnel exit. The creature made a final desperate attempt to break human resolve. It showed them visions of their homeworld, Earth being consumed by cosmic fire, their entire species dying in agony, their civilization reduced to ash and memory. The humans looked at these visions and smiled grimly. They had grown up knowing that the universe was vast, dangerous, and indifferent to their existence. They had always known that everything they loved could be destroyed at any moment. That knowledge had made them appreciate what they had while they had it, and fight harder to protect it. The Void. Leviathan realized with growing horror that it had encountered something completely outside its experience. Beings who drew strength from adversity, who found courage in fear, who chose hope over despair, even when faced with cosmic annihilation. The ancient terror was about to learn why humans were considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy.